There is a specific kind of horror that comes not from violence, but from the complete abandonment of logic. If you find a body in the woods, murdered, that is a tragedy. But we understand murder. We understand motive. But what if you find a man who starved to death inside a warm cabin, surrounded by enough food to feed a family for a year? What if you find a car, fully functional, half a tank of gas, abandoned in the snow for no reason? In 1978, 5 men drove up a mountain in California. They were best friends. They were young. They were happy. They had just won a basketball game. And then, something happened on that road. Something that made 5 grown men flee into the pitch-black wilderness, leaving behind safety, leaving behind heat, and leaving behind their lives. They call it the American Dyatlov Pass. But unlike the incident in Russia, we know exactly where the bodies were. We know exactly how they died. The question that haunts investigators nearly 50 years later isn't how they died. It is why they chose to. Why did Ted Weiher lie in a bed for 3 months, slowly losing 100 pounds of body weight, while a can opener and 3 dozen cans of army rations sat within arm's reach? Welcome to the Void Files. Tonight we are looking for the Yuba County Five. To understand the horror of what happened in the Plumas National Forest, you have to understand the men who went into it. They were collectively known to their families as the boys. Even though they were men ranging in age from 24 to 32, they possessed a certain innocence. Most of them lived with their parents. Most of them dealt with varying degrees of intellectual disabilities or learning barriers. But they were functional, employed, and deeply bonded by sports. First, there was Bill Sterling, 29. He was a gentle soul, deeply religious, who spent his time reading at the library. Jack Hewitt, 24, was the youngest. He was dependent on the others, particularly his best friend, Bill. Ted Weiher, 32, was the big brother of the group, literally and figuratively. He was a friendly, loving man who famously lacked common sense but made up for it with heart. Jack Madruga, 30, was the driver. He was an Army vet, proud of his turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. He was the responsible one. He never let anyone else drive his car. And finally there was Gary Mathias. Gary was 25. He was the outlier. He didn't have the same intellectual challenges as the others. He was an Army veteran who had been discharged for drug use. But his real battle was with schizophrenia. By 1978, however, Gary was doing well. He was medicated, stable, and a star player on their basketball team, the Gateway Gators. On February 24, 1978, the Gateway Gators had a big win. The boys were ecstatic. They had a tournament scheduled for the next day, a tournament they had been looking forward to for weeks. They had their jerseys laid out on their beds at home. That evening, they piled into Madruga's Mercury Montego and drove 50 miles south to Chico, California, to watch a college basketball game. The night was routine. They cheered. They laughed. After the game, they stopped at a convenience store called Bear's Market. It was just before 10 p.m. We know this because the clerk remembered them. They bought a Hostess cherry pie, a Langendorf lemon pie, a Snickers bar, a Marathon bar, and 2 Pepsis. They walked out of the store, got into the turquoise car, and headed south toward Yuba City. It was a straight shot. Highway 99. Flat, easy, familiar. A 45-minute drive. Their parents were waiting up for them. But the Mercury Montego never arrived. Instead of driving south, down the flat valley floor, the car turned east. It began to climb. It passed the pavement. It passed the tree-line. It climbed nearly 4,500 feet into the Sierra Nevada mountains, deep into the rugged, snow-covered wilderness of the Plumas National Forest. They were 70 miles off course. What? Did they take a wrong turn? Jack Madruga was a careful driver who knew the area. You don't accidentally drive 70 miles up a mountain on a logging road. Were they chased? This is where the silence begins. The search began the next morning. Police patrolled the highway. Parents drove the back roads. Nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed the Mercury Montego whole. Then a report came in from a park ranger. 5 days after they vanished, the car was found. It was parked on an unpaved, snow-packed logging road, miles from civilization. But the condition of the car baffled police. When you hear "stuck in the snow," you imagine a car buried, wheels spun deep into the mud. That wasn't the case here. The tires had spun, yes, but the car wasn't truly stuck. 5 strong men could have easily pushed it out. The gas tank was a quarter full. The engine started immediately. The heater worked perfectly. But the windows were rolled down. The doors were unlocked. And inside, investigators found the wrappers from the snacks they bought at Bear's Market. But they didn't find the boys. There were no footprints. A storm had hit the night they vanished, covering their tracks. The police were standing at a crime scene that had been scrubbed clean by the weather. However, there was a witness. And his story turns this from a disappearance into a nightmare. A man named Joseph Schones had been driving up that same road earlier that night. He was checking the snow line for a ski trip. His car got stuck. While he was trying to push it out, he suffered a mild heart attack. He was in pain, terrified, sitting in his car with the engine running to stay warm. Around midnight, 2 hours after the boys bought their snacks, Schones saw headlights. He saw a car coming up the road. A turquoise Mercury Montego. It parked behind him. Schones saw this as his salvation. He got out of his car and yelled for help. But as he approached the Mercury, the lights went dark. The music inside the car stopped. Schones yelled, "I need help. I'm hurt." He claimed he saw a group of men standing outside the car in the glare of the headlights. He also claimed he saw a woman holding a baby. When he yelled, the figures went silent. They didn't answer. They didn't move. Then, according to Schones, he heard a whistling noise. A low, tactical whistle. And the flashlights went out. Terrified, feeling like he was being hunted, Schones retreated to his car and waited. He watched the Mercury for hours. Eventually, the car ran out of gas and he lay there in the freezing cold until morning, when he managed to walk 8 miles down the mountain to safety. His testimony is controversial. Was he hallucinating from the pain of a heart attack? Was the woman with a baby actually a hallucination caused by the stress? Or did he see the boys? And if he did, why did they turn off their lights? Why did they hide from a man asking for help? What were they so afraid of that they preferred the freezing darkness of the forest over human contact? The search for the men was massive. Helicopters, dogs, men on horseback. But a severe blizzard rolled in, burying the mountain in feet of snow. The search was called off. Winter passed. The snow melted. And in June, the forest finally gave up its dead. On June 4, 1978, a group of motorcyclists were riding through a remote part of the forest, nearly 19 miles away from where the car was found. They stumbled upon an old Forest Service trailer. It was used as a base camp for park rangers in the summer. In the winter, it was abandoned. The trailer had a window broken out. Inside, they found the body of Ted Weiher. This is where the case breaks your brain. Ted was lying on a bed, wrapped in 8 bedsheets. His feet were frostbitten and gangrenous. The autopsy revealed that Ted didn't die of exposure. He didn't freeze to death in the snow. He died of starvation. He had lost nearly half his body weight. Based on his beard growth, he had lived inside that trailer for anywhere from 8 to 13 weeks. He was alive for 3 months. Here is the twist. The trailer was stocked. It was a supply cache. When the investigators looked around, they found sea rations, military-grade canned food. There were cans of fruit, spaghetti, cocktail wieners. Dozens of cans had been opened and eaten. But they were opened incorrectly. They were opened with a P38 military can opener, a small, difficult tool to use if you don't know how. But someone knew how to use it. However, there was a locker in the trailer. Inside that locker, which was not locked, was enough dehydrated food to feed all 5 men for a year. Ted Weiher starved to death while leaning against a locker full of food. Why didn't he open it? It gets worse. The trailer had a propane tank. It was full. All they had to do was turn a valve, and they would have had gas heat and a stove. They could have cooked. They could have been warm. Instead, they burned books. They burned furniture. They huddled in the cold, in the dark, eating cold spaghetti, while a heating system sat silent right next to them. What happened to the others? Investigators found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling a few miles from the trailer. They had never made it to shelter. They died in the snow, likely on the walk from the car to the trailer. Their bodies had been scavenged by animals. All that was left were bones. Jack Hewitt's remains were found near the trailer. Just his spine and his shoes. His father, who had been part of the search party, was the one who found his own son's clothing. And Gary Mathias? Gary Mathias is the ghost of this story. Gary's tennis shoes were found inside the trailer. This suggests he made it there alive. But he didn't stay. The sea rations were opened with a P38 can opener. Who knew how to use that? Jack Madruga and Gary Mathias, the Army vets. But Madruga died on the road. That leaves Gary. The theory is that Gary, the only one without an intellectual disability, took charge. He led Ted and Jack Hewitt to the trailer. He opened the cans. He tried to keep them alive. But Gary had schizophrenia. And he had left his medication in the glove box of the abandoned car. Without his medication, under the extreme stress of survival, Gary's mind would have begun to fracture. Did he forget how to turn on the gas? Did he become paranoid, believing the food in the locker was poisoned? Did he hear voices telling him not to open the door? Gary Mathias was never found. His body is likely still out there, somewhere in the deep ravines of the Sierra Nevada. We are left with a timeline that makes no sense. 5 men drive up a mountain for no reason. They abandon a working car for no reason. They walk 19 miles through waist-deep snow in the middle of the night, wearing only light jackets and dress shoes. They find a shelter stocked with food and fuel. And then they slowly die of hunger and cold, refusing to use the resources that would have saved them. Some say it was fear. That they were chased up that mountain by bullies, or locals who didn't like outsiders. That they hid in the trailer, terrified that whoever chased them was waiting outside. Some say it was a manic episode. That Gary Mathias woke up in a fugue state, insisted they drive up the mountain, and the others, trusting their friend, followed him to their doom. When the cold reality hit, the gentle giants simply didn't know how to survive, and the one man who could help them was losing his mind. But the most haunting image is that of Ted Weiher. Imagine him, lying in that trailer. Jack Hewitt is dead. Gary Mathias has walked out into the snow and never returned. Ted is alone. He is wrapped in sheets. He is hungry. Beside him is a locker. If he opens it, he lives. If he turns the valve on the propane tank, he feels warmth. But he doesn't touch them. He lies in the dark, listening to the wind howl through the Plumas National Forest, waiting for a rescue that is weeks away. The Yuba County Five didn't just vanish. They faded away day by day in a prison of their own making. And that is the terrifying reality of this case. The monster on the mountain wasn't Bigfoot. It wasn't a serial killer. It was confusion. Good night.